All right, so by now, I'm sure you've heard of the Great Migration, where hundreds of thousands, or maybe even millions, of Americans are moving out of expensive, highly taxed states and instead are moving to cheaper states that charge less taxes. And the two states that are most famous for this right now are Texas and Florida. I'm sure you're hearing all the podcasters and influencers talking about moving to Austin, and that is because neither of those states charge any state income tax. But what most people don't know is that there's actually 8 states in the US that don't charge any state income tax. And another thing that most people overlook is hitting that subscribe button. It would mean a lot to me. And if you like the video, hit the like button while you're at it. Thank you. No, but for real, another thing people overlook is that income tax is only one part of the equation. There's also property tax, sales tax, and a lot of other charges and fees that the government uses to generate revenue off of the people that are living there. I looked into property taxes and sales taxes for each of the 8 states that have no state income tax to see which state actually has the lowest taxes. Now, the 8 states I looked into are Wyoming, Washington, Texas, Tennessee, South Dakota, Nevada, Florida, and Alaska. But before we dive into the list in order, let's go over a couple assumptions. Number one, I assume that the individual that's considering moving to one of these states, which could hypothetically be yourself, is making a household income of $100,000, is planning to purchase a home worth $300,000, and spends at least $25,000 a year on items that are subject to sales tax. I also assume for tax purposes this person was single. So if you're married or if you're filing taxes jointly, make sure you look into that. Keep in mind that within a lot of these states, different municipalities and cities charge different levels of taxes for property tax and sales tax. So it really depends not only on the state you're moving to, but the actual city you're moving to. For the purposes of this video, I just took an average for the state. So on average, what can you expect to pay if you move to a certain state? And assumption, or point number 3, is that states and cities also have other ways that they generate income besides taxes. These can include things like toll roads, or to save costs by not charging as many taxes, they just offer less services for free than some other states and cities do. There's a whole complex range of things that you should look into before moving somewhere that doesn't involve just tax. But that's it for the assumptions. So now let's jump into the list. All right, coming in at number 8, we have Texas. And right off the bat, we have one of the 2 most famous states for having no income tax that people are moving to. You always hear about Texas is so cheap, how they charge no taxes, but we can see right off the bat that out of all the states that don't charge income tax, Texas is the most expensive. And that is because of their super high property taxes. Coming out to the highest on this list, they charge 1.6% on average in property taxes, meaning that on that $300,000 home, you'd be spending $4,800 every year just on property taxes alone. And their sales tax isn't the highest, but it's still pretty high on the list at 7.25% on average, meaning that with our assumptions, you'd be spending $1,812 on taxes a year. And all in on taxes, including federal income tax, property tax, and sales tax, you'd be paying $29,030 per year just to live in the state of Texas. All right, number 7 on the list is South Dakota. South Dakota also boasts some pretty high property taxes at 1.08%. On that $300,000 home, you'd be spending $3,240 a year on property taxes. That being said, their sales taxes come in a little lower, which is what put them ahead of Texas at 6.4%, meaning you'd spend $1,600 even on sales tax every year. And all in, federal income tax, property tax, and sales tax, you'd spend $27,258 to live in South Dakota. All right, coming in at number 6, we have the state of Washington. And we've seen a pretty drastic decrease in property tax here with an average property tax of 0.84%, meaning you'd spend $2,520 on property taxes each year in this state. But we do see some of the highest sales taxes that we have on this list at 8.86%, meaning that just on sales tax, you'd spend $2,215. And all in, your total taxes for the year would be $27,153 in Washington. All right, we made it to the top 5, and coming in at number 5 is Florida. There's the other state that you often associate with 0% income tax, and they weren't even on the bottom half of the list. So there's a lot of options besides Texas and Florida if you don't want to pay income tax. Florida property taxes are pretty cheap at 0.8% or $2,400 a year, and their sales tax is also pretty reasonable at 7.02%, which comes out to $1,755 a year. Your all-in expenses living in Florida would be $26,573. All right, we made it to the bottom half the list. And number 4, we have Tennessee. Now, Tennessee actually has some of the lowest property tax on the list at 0.56%, meaning that on average, you'd spend $1,680 per year on property taxes. So you may be wondering, why isn't Tennessee the cheapest? Well, their sales tax is the highest on the list. At 9.55%, you can expect to spend $2,387 a year just on sales tax, for all-in taxes of $26,485 a year. All right, we're at the top 3. And honestly, number 3 was a surprise to me. Number 3 on the list is Alaska. Now, believe it or not, Alaska doesn't have the cheapest property taxes at 1.17% or $3,510 a year, but Alaska by far has the cheapest sales tax I've ever seen. And that's because the state of Alaska doesn't actually charge a general sales tax. They just leave it up to cities and municipalities to charge their own sales tax. So some cities may have a higher rate, but on average, the sales tax in Alaska is 1.76%, meaning you'd only spend $440 a year on sales tax. And your all-in taxes living in Alaska with federal income tax, property tax, and sales tax is $26,368 a year. But if you're moving there for it to be cheap, I don't think that's the best idea. Alaska is super remote, super inconvenient. Cost of living there is super expensive. Groceries will be expensive. Gas will be expensive. In fact, Alaska actually pays people to live there. So I wouldn't use cheaper taxes as a reason to move there, but it is a beautiful place. Okay, number 2 on the list. Graham Stephan, if you're watching, this is what you did. This is your state. Nevada is number 2. And the biggest reason for that is Nevada has the lowest property taxes on this list at 0.48% on average, which comes out to $1,440 a year. Now, their sales tax is pretty high at 8.23% or $2,057 a year. But because property taxes are so cheap, it just really makes up. Your total all-in tax price in Nevada is $25,915. All right, number 1, drum roll please, is Wyoming. Wyoming also boasts some of the cheapest property taxes we see on the list at 0.55%, which comes out to $1,650 a year. And other than the outlier of Alaska, has some really cheap sales tax at 5.36%. or $1,340 a year, with a total all-in tax price of $25,408. Now, Wyoming is the least populated state in the US, so I've got to imagine that some of this is to incentivize people to move to the state. There's a lot of beautiful areas. If you want to live somewhere you don't have to pay a lot of tax, check it out. I don't think I'm going to be moving to Wyoming anytime soon, but it's an option if that's what you're interested in. And that's going to do it for the video today, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if there's any other breakdowns you want me to do. While you're at it, make sure you hit that like button, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks, everyone.